Well, good morning. We're really pleased to have this opportunity to feed back to you from our visit to Togo in March of this year. This was our third trip to Togo. We've spent 2 weeks previously in 2 years out with Liz and Gad, helping them in their mission, and it's a real honour to be able to do that, and we feel very blessed that God has given us the opportunity to share our knowledge with people in Togo in support of Liz and Gad. As you can see from this slide, Liz and Gad have some very able help in their work. The young lady who is sitting with them is a member of Gad's family who not only lives with them but supports them in their work, and she is a great help to us when we're there. And the chap sitting with them is a very delightful man called Emmanuel, who is a jolly good all-round person. He drives very well, he translates into several languages, and is a huge support to them and to us when we're there. Our visit this time, we covered an awful lot of ground, both geographically and also in terms of what we were doing. Our brief was really to try to engage as many people and groups within the community in Liz and Gad's work with children with disabilities. Both Andy and I are learning disability nurses by professional background, and we work with children and adults with disabilities and particularly people with autism. And so we were asked whether we could work with parents primarily, but also with professionals and with undergraduate and postgraduate students, providing some education in the field of autism and disability. So we had 2 weeks to do that, and it's a fairly big country, so there wasn't any pressure. The next slide, though, really shows you what we were there for, and we were there for children with disabilities, and whether we were working directly with them, with their mums, or with the professionals who will hopefully in future provide some better services for them, that was our motivation.
Thank you. Broadly speaking, the presentation will cover a sort of chronological sort of sequence of the 2 weeks there. So this was probably on day 2 or 3. We spent a day in the university at Lomé, which is the capital on the coast. And we were talking about aspects of learning disability and autism. An important event, though, was one of the local officials came to talk about child protection, and this was important in terms of being able to engage with local officials. So the people that were there were professionals and students and academics. But also there was one parent of a child with a learning disability had been invited, and the most powerful presentation of the whole day was this mother, because she spoke very clearly and very forcefully, essentially saying, well, you professionals, you really have no idea of the experience of a parent of a child with disabilities. And she spoke to say how, the family is shunned by the community. She did say that her faith was one of the things that kept her going. But also, the personal cost as well. So things like mental health, suffers, poverty, housing. And that was a very powerful, well, it wasn't a presentation, it was just a series of statements. Next on the agenda was talking to a parents group in Lomé. We did 1 day in the first week and 1 day in the second week, and it was it was fundamentals of learning disability and autism that we spoke to them about. The reason that's important is that there's lots of either misinformation or ignorance about sort of what causes a learning disability, for instance. So we were able to give them very clear information about that. The feedback from that was very positive in that people were saying, well, now we have very clear ideas that this was, either something genetic or that something that happened when the baby was developing, rather than the work of a malevolent spirit. And parents evaluated it, very often saying, we now know that we can sort of love our children, and we now know that, they are in the image of God. Very powerful feedback coming back. Right, so that was kind of the first bit, sort of dealing with Lomé. The second bit was a journey to Kara, which is the second city of Togo. As you can see, we had all mod cons with the bus. I was going to say furniture on the top, which wasn't exaggeration. But yeah, Gad promised us that this was a posh coach because there wasn't any livestock. The journey was 9 hours, and there was no air conditioning. So we were fairly grateful that the driver had a fairly leaden foot, so that we got a fairly good sort of flow of air through.
Okay. We were in Kara to do some work at the university, but we were also, I was also very honoured to be asked to preach at the local church. As you can see, this is a huge church, and there were a couple of hundred people at the service. It was interesting that the children stayed all the way through the service, even though it was a kind of 2.5, 3 hour service. It was a lovely, lovely service, which was full of joy and rejoicing. And I think we have a lot to learn about being joyful in our praise and our worship. We were also very blessed to meet lots of people in the church who were very keen to have their photographs taken with us, which was an interesting experience. And really, really blessed to meet the pastor at the church. Some of you may have met Pastor Amos, who was in Frinton a couple of years ago. He is a wonderful, wonderful, God-filled man, and it was such a blessing to meet him and spend time with him. We were delighted to be able to worship with him. And then we spent some time working at the university.
Yes, Kara University. I don't know whether you can see clearly, but this was, the room was a lecture theatre, but there were no sort of glass in the windows. It was all sort of all open, and during the presentations there were sort of chickens wandering through, and but a very enthusiastic audience though. They needed one or two stern words from Maggie to curb their enthusiasm. Again, it was professionals and students and another parent representative, and one of the levels of ignorance was ably illustrated by one of the students asking Maggie if epilepsy was catching. And she had been told that if you touch somebody whilst they were having a seizure, then you could catch the epilepsy. So Maggie put them straight very clearly on that matter. But this is the level of understanding that people have. So Kara University.
Okay. Then we came back from Kara on another bus. Fortunately, the day that we travelled back, it was 39 degrees. So it's pretty hot and it's very humid. Fortunately, this bus had air conditioning, so it was a much more comfortable ride back to Lomé. Once we got back to Lomé, we did some more work with parents. And as you can see, we had a good response to the invitation for parents to come along for, again, a follow-on kind of fairly basic education about how do you teach children with disabilities to do the things we all need to do, like feed themselves, use the toilet. And parents came along for the presentation. As well as the presentation, we'd spend half of the time that we had doing individual interviews with mums so that they could bring their child to us and ask us about their child, and we would give them advice very much on the hoof, which is clearly not what we would do in this country, but we're there for a fortnight, so let's make the most of it. So that was, again, a really good session. While we were in Lomé and the day that we were flying home, we also did some work with the teachers at the special school, and we did a kind of open surgery with them, and they came along with educational issues, and we did that for a few hours, and then we had some interviews with the press, and we had our photographs taken, and then we managed to squeeze in 2 minutes to pack before we came home. But it was fine. The highlight of the trip really for me is the club that Gad and Liz ran in their home for preschool children. Perhaps you'd like to talk about that.
Yes, the Mere Ways On Club, the experience of parents, as you know, sort of has already been said, parents of children with disabilities is very excluding, and parents of young children with disabilities, this is kind of like an oasis of support in a fairly heartless world. So one of the things that was really heartening to see is that we see children and parents coming back from previous times we were there, and we were able to see some very, sort of really encouraging progress in a lot of children in how they were. As you can see, that they adapted very well to the technologies. And Maggie took her iPad, and it's amazing how quickly they pick it up. These two, which you may have sort of spotted in presentations before, the twins, a couple of years ago they weren't able to walk, but by sort of the grace of God and Liz and the Mercy ships, they had an operation, and as you can see, they're whizzing round on the trike and creating even a greater hazard to people walking in front of them. But yes, it's really, really sort of heartwarming.
And then we came back to the UK. But before we finish, there is just one thing that we'd like to draw to your attention, a final note. We've got a picture here of the street that Liz and Gad live on. As you can see, it's mud, but by local standards, that's really not a bad road. Liz and Gad currently have no transport. They have been able to borrow a car until the end of this month, but in all the work that they do across the country, they don't have any way after the end of this month of travelling around the country to do that. As you can see, some of the travelling conditions are not good, so they're going to need a fairly robust vehicle. We would like to be able to provide them with that vehicle, and so what we would like to ask you to do is to pray about that, primarily. Also, we're going to have a retiring collection, so if you could find it in your heart to give some money towards that for Liz and Gad so that they can travel through the country to carry on the work that God has laid on their hearts. They appreciate all the support that you give them, and we really appreciated the prayer and the good thoughts that came from people in this church while we were there. So thank you very much indeed.